Testing 1, 2. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to bring to order the Academic Innovation Subcommittee Committee of the Education Committee. Not enough caffeine at lunch, my apologies. I want to go ahead and start this off with recognizing Representative Cantrell, and if you could open us up in prayer, please.
Be happy to. Let's pray together. God, we come before you this afternoon recognizing that we need you, we're dependent upon you, and we need your wisdom and your thoughts today. So God, give us strength, give us wisdom, give us courage to do the right thing by the people of this great state of Georgia. We pray all this in Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Representative Cantrell. There's a lot of people who want to be heard on this bill, and we want to be respectful. So I'm going to ask you, if you signed up, we are going to take the time to recognize you, but I would ask that you hold your comments to 2 minutes. The favor you could do for the chair is bring up your iPhone, your Droid, and literally put a timer on. Have a friend maybe time it for you if you need to. I'm trying not to be the bad guy to say, and say, hey, time's up. So please do me a favor and try everything that you can to keep your comments to 2. The bill's sponsor is going to go first, Representative Cantrell. And Representative Cantrell, if we could limit your comments, please, to 5 minutes.
Okay, there we go. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'll be brief because I know we do have a lot of people who want to speak to this bill. I'm talking about House Bill 999 today. And I'd like to say that it's way past time really for Georgia to take a fresh look at the way we educate our children. Because even when our public schools do an excellent job, which they most often do, there's always going to be a small percentage of students who do not perform well in a traditional classroom setting for a variety of reasons. This means we must focus on funding students and not systems, because one size does not fit all, especially as it comes to education. We already fund students directly with Pell Grants and the GI Bill for higher education. The same goes for pre-K programs like Head Start. So all I'm asking is that we take that same logic for pre-K and for secondary higher education, and let's apply it to K through 12 education and fund students, not systems. So members of the committee, I'd ask you to ask yourself the following questions. Should a student from a low-income family be stuck in a chronically underperforming school? Should they just be forced to stay there? Should a student who's being bullied at their school because of how they identify or because of their appearance, should they be stuck in an environment where they can't learn? Should parents be required to send their children to a school which seems to be more focused on social and political issues rather than teaching reading, writing, math, and history? Should a parent be required to send their children to a school that is not safe due to a lack of discipline or which refuses to follow simple health guidelines in slowing the spread of COVID? The answer to all these questions is no. That's why I introduced House Bill 999, the Educational Freedom Act. The bill provides school choice for all. The only requirement is that the student be attending public school currently. The choice is provided by providing a Promise Scholarship account for any public school student who needs a different learning environment. The Promise Scholarship account can only be used for pre-approved educational expenses. You see, Georgians want school choice. The most recent polling is clear. 74% support school choice. Yes, it's more popular amongst Republicans at 83%, but a full 70% of Democrats support school choice. It's the same along racial lines. 70% of Asians, 73% of Blacks, 69% of Hispanics, 76% of whites support school choice. Even more telling is that 77% of parents who currently have their kids in public school support the idea of school choice. This is a bipartisan piece of legislation. I have 3 Republican and 3 Democrat sponsors on the bill. I don't want to clear one thing up because I get accused of this all the time. But being for school choice does not mean that a person is against public schools. It simply means that we recognize that even though our public schools might do a great job, there are always going to be a small percentage of students who need a different learning environment in which to succeed. Studies show that when students have choice, not only do the academic outcomes of those who leave public school improve, but the academic outcomes of those who stay improve as educators are able to focus their efforts on students who are in the correct learning environment. I'm a former public school educator. I taught for 8 years in Cobb County. My mother was a member of the State Board of Education in the 80s, appointed by Governor Joe Frank Harris. My grandparents were educators. My grandfather was the principal. He hired the teacher. He liked her. He married her. She became my grandmother. My son is a public school educator. There's nobody in the chamber here that supports public education more than me. But it's not an either or decision. It's a both and. We can fully support public education and offer the students who need it an option for a learning environment that works better for them. In all the 8 years I've been down here, I have lobbied our governors to fully fund education. We finally achieved that goal the last year of Governor Deal's term, and then the first year of Governor Kemp's term, and then COVID. But you've seen the governor's proposed budget. We fully fund QBE again this year. We finish out the $5,000 raise. I am vastly supporting all of those efforts. So please do not accuse me of not supporting our public schools. There's a lot of concern about from parents today about CRT, about obscenity in schools, about lack of transparency, about different approaches to deal with the pandemic. And I submit to you today that if parents had a choice, that all of these issues would take care of themselves, because schools would have to be more responsive to parents if they knew the parents could go to something else. Let me just a couple key features of HB 99 that sets it apart, 999 that sets it apart from HB 60, which passed out of this committee last year. Key differences. Number one, any public school student is eligible. Number two, it would establish a promised scholarship with an annual contribution of $6,000 that could only be used for pre-approved educational purposes. The money would never touch the family's hands. It would be distributed directly to pre-approved vendors who would apply to be in the program. $6,000, people go, well, that's a lot. Or some people say, well, that's a little. It's about $400 less than what we spend currently, what the state spends currently, average on our students. Funding would be subject to appropriations. So there's no cap in this bill. There's no how many students. It would completely be up to the Appropriations Committee to decide how much money they wanted to allocate for this program. To be a separate line item, has nothing to do with QBE, and be completely separate from the education funding that we already have. All the other features are the same as House Bill 60, which we passed out of this bill last year. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Cantrell. I'm going to go ahead and ask the committee, do you have any questions of the representative? Would you like to be recognized? Yes. Representative Carter.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. And Representative, I really appreciate your passion. I do have a few questions. One, just to kind of start out with, understanding your motivation for the bill, and you've made a few accusations as to why parents would need this opportunity. Is there any data or facts to back up your claim that that students would be stuck, low-income families would be stuck in underperforming schools? Do you have data to substantiate that?
That's just a fact. We don't need data. If you're in an underperforming school, you're districted for, then there you are.
Actually, you do need data. And then probably one of my bigger questions, if you don't mind, continue to follow up. The set aside amount for this particular grant is $6,000, actually, which exceeds what the state currently pays per student. But my larger question is, if the thought is to give a low-income family an opportunity to be in a better performing school, how do you anticipate a low-income parent to afford a private school and to get them there?
Okay, well, in the bill, it allows up to $500 a year to be used for transportation to get the student there. The average private school, if private school is the option, this is not just for private school. It could also work for tutoring, textbooks, online learning, micropods. There's all kinds of different things besides just tuition. But if you're talking about just private school tuition, the average in Georgia is under $10,000. So $6,000 gets a parent a long way towards that number. And so there's other scholarships that might be available, all kinds of other ways. And it wouldn't hurt for parents to have some personal skin in the game. Anyway, a little bit of ownership of the program if they wanted to take advantage of it. But I would challenge you on I talked to the Budget and Research Office, and next year the per student funding looks like it's going to be about $6,400. So this is actually less than what the state portion would be.
But it's more currently. Am I correct?
Right, but this won't be in effect
Okay.
until next year, which is when it'll be more.
I just want to be clear because we haven't passed the budget for next year yet. And your testimony actually was mostly about students who were in low performing, low income schools. And if you're going to take them out of those schools into a private school, and I don't think you answered my question, is how will a low income parent, using your words, be able to afford to send their student to a private school?
Well, as I said, the average is about $9,500 to $10,000. If they have that availability within their driving range, then they would have to find, $3,000 to $4,000 additional to fit the bill. And there would be scholarships and other things they could do, and they could pay some of the money themselves if that's if they wanted to exercise their choice.
And if I have one more question, but you're going to help me with this because I just saw the substitute today and I haven't really had an opportunity to really go through it. But I think there was something in the other bill that stated that any school that had been in existence for a year would be eligible. And again, I was trying to peruse this. Is that in this one?
You're talking about schools that would be eligible to receive students with this
Yes.
program? Yes, that same language is in there.
Okay, so my concern would be if a school has only, my additional concern, if a school has only been in operation a year, how do we feel some confidence that the school is sustainable? Because any business that's only been in operation a year has not had an audit. So how do we address?
Yeah, that's a
that
fair
issue?
question, but they will be audited. But here's the thing is I trust parents. I trust parents to make the best decision for their children. And those private schools have the ultimate in accountability because the parent at any time can remove their child and stop paying tuition. So they have the ultimate accountability, whereas the parents don't have that same option in the public school setting.
And I think this may be the last one. Now, parents who have students with special needs, they have needs, special accommodations or 504, this language, unless it's been updated, they lose that option, correct? So how do you anticipate or how do you expect for a parent that's low income, special needs, in a low performing school to be able to address all of those without having that additional protection that they're going to lose if they take advantage of this?
I'm not sure I'm following your question.
There's language in here that talks about it's going to lose their 504 plan if they take advantage of the scholarship.
No, they don't lose the plan. That's what makes them eligible for the special needs to qualify under the special needs category. But this applies to all students. You're talking about you're probably talking about that they have to waive their rights under IDEA. Is that what you're talking about?
Right. And it says, yeah, the ADA and the accommodations of the 504.
Okay, that's existed since 2008, I guess, when SB 10 was passed. And I've asked and asked and asked, and there's not been one incident, not one issue with parents waiving that right since in the last, 14, 15 years that SB 10 has existed. So I don't anticipate there being any issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Carter. The chair recognizes Chairman Chokus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Cantrell, isn't it true that there are 180 public school systems in the state of Georgia? And it isn't also true that because of these 180 different school systems, it's your zip code that determines your eligibility and which school you want to go to?
That's correct.
Isn't it also true that I live in the rural part of the state and I have 4 school systems in my state and at least 1 private school? And these different public schools have varying degrees of performance, and that it's a parent's responsibility to look after their children. And many of them send their children out of county, have to pay extra tuition at the public schools that have a better performance. And to further that, isn't it also true that the private schools that I'm familiar with provide scholarships for low-income families so that they can get what they think is best for their children? But the bottom line is, it's really the parents' responsibility to do the research, to check what they think is best for their children, not only academically, but athletically and in other areas. And that's basically what your bill is trying to do.
Yes, sir. That's completely accurate, Chairman Chokus. And I would say that it's completely within the realm of possibilities that 2 families attend the same public school and one has a absolutely perfect experience for their child, because children are wired differently. You know, the Bible says, train up a child in the way they should go. I've got 3 kids. They're all 3 completely different, had completely different learning styles. They may have done great. One might do great, and then the other family's got a child in there and they're struggling. And it could be for a lot of reasons. It may not have anything to do with the school. It might be bullying. It might be just some of the environmental things that are happening there that are keeping that child from reaching their full potential. So at the end of the day, I trust the parents to make the best decision for their child.
And let me follow up, sir. And that's basically what this bill is about,
Yes, sir.
allowing the parents to provide what's best they think for their children.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Chokus. Chairman Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, to the author. Isn't it true that in Georgia today, people that have financial means in many ways have school choice?
Yes, that is true.
That if mom and dad could afford, $15,000 a year of after-tax income per kid, they could put their kid in a private school.
Yeah.
Or if they don't like the schools where they live, they can relocate to an area that the schools work for their kids, and they can, even if they have to sell their house at a loss, they can go do that.
That's accurate. They have the means to do so.
Or if you're a single mom, you're working 2 jobs to keep the lights on, you can't homeschool your kids, even if you think that may be right. But isn't it true this bill allows folks who do not have financial means to close that gap? And so we can move away from a system where school choice is segregated based on income and lets folks of all financial backgrounds participate in being able to exercise that parental responsibility you're talking about.
Yeah, that's accurate, Chairman Sessler. And I think one of my main frustrations that I've had in my time here is that lots of members here send their children to the school of their choice, which is their right to do so, while at the same time working very hard to deny that same option to families who can't afford it. And I don't understand that way of thinking, the good for me, but not for thee kind of thinking.
Does gentleman yield for a further question?
Sure.
In the healthcare setting, even in a setting where people don't have the means to provide healthcare for themselves, perhaps it's subsidized through their business or even subsidized through a state or federal program. Isn't it true that generally folks can decide the doctor they go to?
Yes, absolutely.
Isn't it true that a woman going in for an OB appointment's not assigned an obstetrician or OBGYN? They get to choose that OBGYN. It's a very personal decision, right?
Certainly.
I've had constituents tell me before it's an equally personal decision as to who's going to spend 35 hours a week pouring in and educating my first grader. And this just even in a circumstance where folks receive 100% public assistance for their healthcare decisions. We don't have a system where that's assigned to them. They can exercise with those state and federal dollars. They can exercise choice as to who provides their healthcare. Why wouldn't we also want them to have the choice as to who educates their kids?
It's a mystery to me.
Representative Carter, would you like to be recognized?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm like the only Black female up here, single parent. And when the kids were younger, my husband passed away and I became a widow, lost my job and was considered low income. Had one of my sons with dyslexia and actually needed some resources. And I think the state had passed some legislation around the special needs scholarship. But at that particular time, I'm trying to decide on keeping the lights or food. More or less try to make the mortgage and trying to make the best decision for my 3 sons. And even with that special needs scholarship, paying for the school that he really needed was still out of reach because it wasn't enough. I love the idea of school choice, and I love the county that I live in because it gave me some opportunities in public school that I wouldn't have had in private. And a parent who can afford private school should do what they can with their funds, but we should not take state dollars. Again, if the idea is how do we really help students that are in quote unquote low performing schools that are low income, then maybe we need to add, may need to amend this and add some means testing in it. And there needs to be some other safeguards. One in particular, you said that there's no cap in appropriations, but in a lean time, when we do have austerity cuts to the QBE funding for education will be cut, but this won't. And I think we need to really stop and think through if the idea, and I have deep respect for you, but I being down here, I just think we have the wrong objective if we're sincere about who we're trying to ensure gets a quality education. So I hope that you'll take this and if it makes it out of here, clean up some of these things that really need to be cleaned up, that we could really help the students that you're saying you're wanting to help.
Yeah.
I just had to say that because I can't just continue to sit in these meetings as a Black female single mom and hear you all say these things when you have no idea what it's like to be a Black female single mom trying to raise kids on your own.
That's a fair statement, and the respect is mutual, Representative Carter, and your story is extremely valid, and I think everybody's story is valid. And so all I'm trying to do is to, regardless of what that person's story is, that they have an option available to them. It might not work for them in their situation. In fact, it's very likely not going to work for that many people. We're talking about a small percentage of people that it will help, but that's a significant number of people, no matter, if it's 500 or 1,000 or whatever it is. I think it's worthwhile goal.
Representative Carter, thank you for your comments. The committee, thank you. What I'd like to do now is go to public comment. The chair made a slight mistake. I did not count in the online participants who wanted to speak. So we'll still hold at 2. But if you could do me the small favor, like I said, and time yourself, I'll raise my right hand at around 15 seconds left. This way it'll be kind of equal opportunity. And so no one feels as if they're being picked on. So what I'd like to do is I'll tell you who's up and then who's on deck. So we'll use a little baseball metaphor since we are the home of the World Series champions. And at least that way you'll know that you're second and you'll be coming right up on deck. So first up is Isabel Ortero. My apologies. The second one, I can't read the first name, but I believe this last name is Battles. Oh yeah, and please come to the podium. Thank you. If you could, please introduce yourself. If you represent an organization, please state that organization and then go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So my name is Isabel Otero. I am the Georgia Policy Director for the SPLC Action Fund, which is a 501c4 dedicated to safeguarding the human rights of all people. As you probably know, since 2003, Georgia has slashed about $10 billion altogether from public schools. And HB 999 unfortunately continues this pattern of using public dollars to fund private schools. And one of the more troubling parts for us especially is starting in lines 104, I believe, of this sub, where it does talk about, it says, accepting a voucher shall have the same effect as a parental refusal of consent of services under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and a waiver of their rights under the Federal Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And so that means that students with disabilities lose the vast majority of the protections under these laws for accepting one of these scholarships. And that includes, the right to a free, appropriate public education that meets their disability needs. And unfortunately, private schools are not under any obligation to accept a kid under the scholarship, and especially a kid with disabilities. So the lowest estimates that we know of for private school tuition in Georgia are about $12,000 a year. This scholarship would only be $6,000. And for a kid who, for example, like Representative Carter said, a child with dyslexia, for a school that is known for treating kids or helping kids with dyslexia, that is more a tuition of about $30,000 to $40,000 a year. And so unfortunately, that means that these scholarships are more likely to be used by more affluent families as a sort of discount for going to their private schools, as opposed to for the kids that I think the representative is hoping to help here. And just the one last quick point is that this bill and HB 60 and others like it are very similar to, the kind of things that we've seen as a very sad legacy after Brown v. Board, where, Southern states, especially, in the South, there was an organized resistance
That wasn't
to
intentional.
integration. Yes, thank you.
My apologies. I did not mean to be that harsh. Got to take the ringer off. My apologies. Ms. Battles, you're next. Terrence Wilson is on deck.
Hello, my name is Cindy Battles, and I am the Director of Policy and Outreach for the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. I feel like I should have got 30 seconds for that, but y'all love talking about those low-income single moms who these voucher programs are going to help year after year after year after you take and take and take from public education funds while refusing, except maybe in an election year, to fully fund public education. So let me tell you about my son, because I'm that mom that you're talking about. So maybe talk to us before you start talking about us. Because my son went through a traumatic year and he was tested and he was like borderline ADD, but he definitely had some oppositional defiance disorder. And we lived in Noonan, and there was a really great public school called Elm Street. And I lived in an apartment that was about 2 miles from the school, and I worked about 3 miles from the school. So if my kids needed me, I could get there. And he went into this really great class called an EBD classroom, and he thrived. After a year of trying to help my kid, he was thriving. But guess what happened? They had to shut that program down because public school funds would not allow them to continue that class. They put him in a special education class, but Trey is smart. He's smart as hell. Pardon my language, I'm sorry. So he didn't need that. He did worse. They put him in a regular classroom. He did worse for years. This went on with my kid for years. He struggled with depression. He struggled. My 12-year-old child was threatening to commit suicide. And yes, I tried this idea of private education. Even with your $6,000 scholarship, it wouldn't have been enough because I was raising 2 kids. Even if I could have afforded it, the school that would have taken him was clear across the county. This may help a few kids, but it hurts many kids like mine, who grew up to be a Marine, by the way, and I'm very proud of him. I'm asking y'all to stop defunding public education for the few that this scholarship is going to help.
Thank you, Ms. Battles, and thank your son for his service, please. Mr. Wilson is up and Owens is on deck.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for allowing me the opportunity to speak. My name is Terrence Wilson. I'm the Regional Policy and Community Engagement Director for IDRA. We are an independent, nonpartisan education nonprofit committed to achieving equal educational opportunity for every child through strong public schools. We are opposed to House Bill 999 because students in Georgia deserve the opportunity to attend excellent, fully funded, diverse schools that affirm and sustain all aspects of their identity. We believe that this bill will likely create a Georgia educational system that is more racially segregated and that does not provide adequate protections for students' civil rights. I've heard a lot spoken today about the rights of parents, and I want to remind the folks in this room that providing students the very best well-rounded equitable public educational system is at the core of our public mandate outlined in our Georgia Constitution. Our Constitution states that the provision of an adequate public education for the citizens shall be the primary obligation of the state of Georgia. The scholarship voucher program outlined in this bill diverts significant funds from our current public schools, and we fear that it would significantly diminish the ability for schools to provide that adequate education that's required in our Constitution. Furthermore, research that has been conducted on similar voucher programs across the country does not show that the academic gains from this approach are worthy of the investment. For example, in 2017, a multi-state review of voucher programs found that students in voucher programs scored significantly lower than traditional public school students on reading and math tests, and there was no significant effect of vouchers leading to improved public school performance. In fact, in some states who have tried this voucher program, students in voucher programs have had negative effects on student achievement, with students enrolled in the Louisiana Scholarship Program increasing their chances of failing math by 50%, and students in Indiana using vouchers to attend private schools consistently scoring lower on reading and math tests. The evidence that we have simply does not justify the significant risk to the academic futures of our Georgia students. Additionally, we know and research agrees that strong public schools are integrated, diverse schools. We know that programs like this can increase racial segregation, and we know that right now, white students are significantly overrepresented in private schools, while Black and Latino students are significantly underrepresented. I'll leave you with one final set of statistics for the current way that our private schools look. According to 2017-18 data, nearly 7% of Georgia private schools are 100% white. 21% are over 90% white, and nearly 47% of these schools are 75% white. We encourage our leaders to invest in public school options that would integrate our students and allow us to move beyond our past history of racial segregation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Owens, you're up. Ms. Suggs on deck.
Thank you so much, Chairman Jones and members of the Georgia House Education Subcommittee on Academic Innovation. By way of introduction, my name is Stephen Owens, and I'm a senior K-12 education policy analyst for the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, a nonprofit, nonpartisan research and advocacy organization that advances lasting solutions to expand economic opportunity and well-being for all Georgians. GBPI has a long-standing obligation to legislation that funds public funds to private schools, and therefore bills such as House Bill 999. The loss of necessary civil rights protections, the evidence of fraud in similar programs such as Arizona's, and the Arizona public's repudiation of said programs show that this policy provides no benefit to the state. Students too are vulnerable when we reject federal protections for the mirage of choice. Consider that a student who leaves Bacon County's great schools wouldn't have a private school option in the county. She would also be leaving a system that protects from discrimination based on income, sexual orientation, or ability. If she is not being served well, the solution cannot be to fund a school that might expel her for being gay, or one where the teacher doesn't have a bachelor's degree. Currently, our public schools are struggling to hire licensed teachers, substitutes, and bus drivers. Our state has been unable to pay for even one counselor for every 450 students in the school, a paltry amount considering the best practices of one for every 250. We remain one of only 6 states in the nation that does not provide additional funding to educate students living in poverty. Any dollar that would be spent on this voucher should instead be used to protect the underfunded public schools the state has a constitutional responsibility to support. I conclude by asking that you vote for all of Georgia's students by voting no on House Bill 999.
Thank you, Mr. Owens. Ms. Suggs, and then I believe it's Mr. Pauly, P-A-U-L-Y.
Good afternoon. My name is Claire Suggs, and I am here today on behalf of PAGE, the Professional Association of Georgia Educators. I very much appreciate this opportunity to address the committee and raise some of the concerns that we have. Page opposes House Bill 999 for multiple reasons, but I just want to highlight two of them this afternoon. The first is the lack of a requirement that teachers who work in the private schools who would participate in this program would be certified by the Georgia Professional Standards Commission. Research has consistently shown that teachers are the most critical factor in student learning. This bill, though the schools would be receiving public resources, this bill does not require that those teachers meet the same standard benchmarks set by the Professional Standards Commission that teachers working in public schools do. In addition, it does not require those teachers to meet the standard that the bill sets for tutors who want to provide services under this bill. One other concern that we have is around a lack of accountability. The bill does provide transparency requirements with some robust reporting, but it doesn't have any mechanism to evaluate and remove private schools or service providers that just aren't serving kids effectively. Public schools operate in a robust accountability system that has mandated interventions. A program like this should have something comparable. And in fact, there are states, including Louisiana and Indiana, that have in fact created accountability systems that provide robust oversight for the private schools that participate in those voucher programs. We strongly ask respectfully that members of the committee review the letter that we shared with you this afternoon that outlines these concerns and some of our other concerns, and that you reject House Bill 999. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Suggs. Mr. Pauly, and then I believe Ms. Walton.
Good afternoon. My name is Justin Pauly. I'm with the Georgia School Boards Association. Chairman, committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak here. GSBA has a longstanding legislative positions, and the position that opposes this particular bill, I'm going to read just very quickly. But this was voted on again this year within our membership. Our membership votes on these positions every year. GSBA is opposed to vouchers, tuition tax credits, K-12 education savings plans, or scholarships whose purpose is to allocate public funds to private schools or home study. And so I wanted to list just a few of these concerns. This bill funds students at a higher level than what is allocated to public education. And we just see that all students should be funded at the appropriate levels. Another area was the rollover for colleges and universities that is appropriating money, which is set aside for K-12 public education. And finally, we would respectfully ask the bill would, we feel needs a fiscal note to see what the actual costs will be. So thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. Ms. Walton, and then Mr. Clay, Chuck Clay.
Good afternoon. I'm Gretchen Walton. I'm the Compliance and Legislative Affairs Officer for Cobb County School District. I've served the district for 22 years, first teaching, then leading a Title I high school for 10 years, and then as a district leader. I'm puzzled how any family at the Title I high school where I worked could actually use this money to fund the education at the private school I attended about 30 years ago that cost $13,000 a year at the time. We opened our school choice process under HB 251, where families can choose from over 60 schools. We also have recently completed our magnet school process, where students can apply to go to one of 5 specialized high school programs. Additionally, we have a hardship process where families can ask for a transfer based on personalized circumstances, such as childcare needs, being a victim of bullying, etc. All of our families have choices, not just those who have means. We oppose this bill, but I will still try to give some concrete feedback on particulars of the bill. A clause should be added that in years when QBE is unfunded, this program and any similar voucher program should also go unfunded, even if it is on a parallel percentage. If QBE is underfunded by 15%, then this program should be too. Lines 73 to 75 require that a student only attend a public school for 6 weeks. Those lines promote transiency, which is extremely detrimental to education and children. It also means that schools might never receive any funding for the time a student attends a school, since only kids enrolled during the 2 annual counts are funded. Additionally, this bill places an unfunded burden on public schools in line 260, where they will be forced to provide standardized assessments for children not enrolled in their system, and then not actually require any concrete level of achievement on those tests as a measure of accountability. Finally, in light of accountability, having a parent committee made of parents who are benefiting from this program as the only true accountability for a program is the same as if we let a school decide if they're doing a good job or not. We have external accountability measures to protect children. If you want to make funding universal through a voucher program, the accountability needs to be universal too. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Walton. Mr. Clay, and then, and forgive me, the last name is T-E-R-E-I.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Chuck Clay. I've spent about 35 years either here in the legislature or lobbying, much of it on behalf of public education. But I'm speaking today, and today really is my own sort of long-term view. If you look at the world of the United States as we see it today, probably the greatest gift arguably has been public education. Public education, ladies and gentlemen, is the one great equalizer that we have in this country, have had. Now, does that mean we can rest on our laurels? Does that mean public education is a jalopy out in the backyard falling apart bit by bit? No. Public education today, thanks to leadership that's sitting in this table and many, many others over many, many years, we have more options than ever before using state dollars to provide creative and innovative alternatives. This, folks, is a bridge too far. It directly flies at the face of what has been the institutional support of the greatest successes in this world and in this country. It is not time to look afield. It is not time to fire torpedoes. It is not time to take a massive chunk of state dollars and put it in programs that are, yes, popular, until you start breaking down what that definition means, then it's less so. The majority of people support public education. And I'd leave you with this. If it was such a failing and failed product, why has Georgia been at the very forefront in success and raising grades, options? The Department of Education and you all, QBE, parents, moms and dads, have done the job. Let's keep doing it. Let's not dismantle it now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Clay. And ma'am, I don't want to wreck your last name, so I'll go ahead and let you announce yourself. But on deck is Mr. Ray.
My name is Holly Ture. I'm a Georgia parent. My oldest daughter, who is 11, had a friend who was very similar to her. They both struggled with attention deficit disorder, both needing extra attention in the classroom, and both struggling with their mental health due to school closures, mandates, and forced digital learning. Her friend's parents moved with the sole purpose of obtaining an education that would not disrupt their child's needs. Unfortunately, my family cannot afford to move to obtain the same for our daughter. For the last 2 years, my daughter's friend has excelled and thrived in her new learning environment, while my daughter's mental health continues to deteriorate and her learning loss continues to build. The lack of access to school choice in the state of Georgia has now created a very deep and wide learning gap just between my daughter and her peer. Now, I ask that you imagine this at a much greater scale, because this is what we are facing when students cannot access quality education. My youngest daughter was showing great promise academically. She is now in 3rd grade and can hardly remember what school was like in comparison to the last 2 years. It pains me to have to wonder how advanced she would be at this moment in time had she had the opportunity to access schools that remained open and had not forced digital learning on her. One where the focus is academic achievement and stretching and strengthening her abilities. Instead, much like her sister, we watch many of her peers withdraw from our public school system and enroll in private schools that could really pour into those formative years of education. My youngest is unable to reach her full potential because of the lack of obtainable choice in the state of Georgia. I myself am the product of school choice. I grew up in the inner city of Cleveland. I took advantage of school vouchers because my district was underperforming. And because of this, I was able to attend the school of my parents' choice. The funding did not cover the complete cost of tuition, but it was the jumpstart needed to put me on a path of providing me for a quality education. My family is not in the position to move to a different county. My family cannot afford private tuition. My family cannot afford to become a single income household so one parent can adequately homeschool. Instead, we are stuck. Instead, state funds continue to funnel into a system that has failed my children the last 3 years. Something has to change. Right now in the state of Georgia, learning gaps have deepened and widened exponentially these last 2 years. We already know that the learning loss experience for some students will have a lifelong impact on their socioeconomic status. Should my children have access to the Promise Scholarship, they too would no longer be stuck, but on a path to a thriving, successful academic career. One where the parent can choose the proper learning environment for each of their specific needs, ensuring a life that can avoid poverty, crime, drug use, and lack of secondary education. I ask that you please vote yes on HB 999.
Thank you, Ms. Terry. Mr. Ray, and on deck, forgive me, it's a hyphenated name, Harsh Karma. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the time to speak today. I'll be very brief because I did submit comments in writing. My name is George Ray, and I represent the Georgia Education Coalition, a group of 12 innovative public school districts in and around Atlanta. And we take quite seriously our role in protecting students, in teaching students, and protecting the public purse. And this bill, both House Bill 999, House Bill 60, and other voucher efforts really fly in the face of that emphasis on protection and teaching. We take those roles very seriously, and we believe that these pieces of legislation are not necessary and fly in the space of what we've been trying to do. I will thank or note that the legislature has over time realized that the way to improve outcomes is by investment and focus and not by defunding. I would ask that this committee vote no against these voucher expansions and instead focus on investing and improving public education. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. Appreciate it. I believe Ms. Harsh-Kramer.
It's Cecily Harsh-Kanane, but it's a tough one, so that's fine.
All right, thank you. And then on deck is Ms. Morgan.
Okay, so I am Cecily Harsh-Kanane with Public Education Matters Georgia Action Fund. HB, we've heard a lot about this, and I'm going to repeat myself some, but repeat what's been said some, but I think it's important to point out some of these things. HB 999 takes public funds and with virtually no qualification and very little oversight, grants a $6,000 voucher to pay for private school and/or private service providers. With all that schools are grappling with the pandemic, health issues, academic gaps, mental health issues, teacher and staff shortages, this bill is not what we need to do to be doing to support our 1.7 million public school students in Georgia. Representative Cantrell and proponents say this gives choice to parents. This is an illusion of choice. Parents have to have the means to supplement the vouchers to pay for the tuition at private schools, which has been brought up. Thank you. And they would have to have a private school in their vicinity, which many places in our state do not. They would have to apply and possibly get accepted. And if they were then accepted, they would forfeit their federal protections that our public schools do guarantee. The only increased opportunity with this bill would be for private schools and other private entities. This increases their applicant pool, further increases the ability to siphon public funds and send them to private schools. This is not responsible education policy. I ask you all to please vote no. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, ma'am. Ms. Morgan, you're up, and Hawkins on deck.
Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Morgan, a 23-year veteran educator, and I'm currently a kindergarten teacher and the president of the Georgia Association of Educators. At GAE, we stand for public education each and every day. Our members have one goal when they get up in the morning, whether they're a bus driver, whether they're a classroom teacher, a counselor, or a principal. And that is to provide each and every one of our students the best public education possible. Cuts to public education over the years are showing. We say cuts to public education don't heal. Before we take additional public dollars and send them to private schools, we should not only restore the funding in the QBE formula, but let's take that tally of the cuts that have been made over the past years and restore the amount that was cut over the years and see what our wonderful public educators can do with those dollars. We believe every child deserves a caring, committed, qualified educator. And that qualified educator is an educator certified by the state of Georgia. They deserve a fully funded school with adequate resources to provide not only for their academic needs, but their social and emotional needs and their physical needs. One thing in this bill that's quite troubling to me as a classroom educator, 6 weeks in our public school system is not long enough for the multi-tiered system of supports that is designed to provide for students' individual needs to even be implemented. 6 weeks is tier 1. That's when we are learning the student and collecting data to see if they are successful in regular classroom instruction. And as soon as we would be beginning that process to find the supports that a student needs, they would be leaving us. So they would be waiving their rights that they may have to specialized instruction before the process was even complete to determine they needed that instruction. Please vote no to this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. We have one more person, I'll say physically here at 341, then there's 3 online, and then that will complete public comment. Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Taylor Hawkins. I'm the Director of Advocacy for Frontline Policy Action, which is the largest pro-family policy organization in our great state. We're here in support of House Bill 999. As we talk with parents from across the state, they are strongly in support of expanding educational opportunity through measures like House Bill 999. It is not just our supporters, however. This is true of the vast majority of all Georgians. You've heard statistics on this issue already today, but our organization has done professional polling of parents, grandparents, and legal guardians all across Georgia just in the last few months. And our polling shows that those crucial decision makers for children's education overwhelmingly support school choice. Over 78% of Georgia parents, grandparents, and legal guardians support empowering parents to choose the school that best fits their child's needs. When asked whether they believe that parents should be able to decide how to use the tax dollars that are allocated to their child's education in a way that best meets their child's needs, they responded with 79% overall. And most importantly, when asked if school choice should be assigned based on need or should be universally available, almost 73% support school choice being a right universally available to parents in our state. This goes against everything in the mainstream conversation about this issue, which has for many years centered around ensuring that the fewest students possible have school choice available to them. We are not siphoning funds away from education. We are empowering parents to make choices that best address their child's specific needs. We believe the data is clear that when you give parents a choice, you give children a better chance at an excellent education. For all these reasons and many others, we support increasing parents' ability to ensure that their children get the best education possible, and we believe that this bill does that. So we would encourage the passage of House Bill 999. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. We're going to move online for 3 speakers. We don't have the ability for me to wave my hand at 15 seconds. So please, I need you to time yourself. And if I need to, I may have to interrupt you. But we're going to go ahead and start with the last name is Badiane.
Good afternoon. My name is Kiara Badiane, and I'm a mother of 2 sons in Atlanta. I have a 12-year-old son with dyslexia and an 8-year-old son. Can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
She did it.
Hello?
Is this it?
Can you hear me?
Is this one of those jokes? How many people does it take?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello?
Can you send an IM with our apologies? It's not intentional. If they could maybe put into chat a quick summary, and we'd be happy to get it to the committee members. My apologies to those on Zoom. Hopefully you were able to hear the testimony. That ends all of the public comment. Oh, one more. Maybe it doesn't.
Now ask her.
Hello?
Hello?
Can you? Can you say Georgia Tech?
Georgia Tech.
Whoever just said that doesn't get recognized for the next 10 minutes. I feel so bad. I do apologize. They can hear online, but we can't hear them. Right. So our sincere apologies.
We'll have another.
Yeah, this is just a sub. There'll be an opportunity. I apologize, but please, if you'd like, go ahead. For those online, you can place stuff into the chat and we'll be happy to get that to the committee. If we could, can we cut and paste that into a document? Anything that comes in chat? Okay, thank you. All right. All right, that's the end of public comment regarding HB 999 LC 490791S. What is the will of the committee? I hear a motion to do pass. And do I have a second? Second, I want to remind, before we go into a vote, is there any discussion?
Yeah.
My apologies, Representative Carter. What was the question? This is the sub. I was just about to clarify. Please, if you're on the general committee and not on the academic innovation committee, sit this one out if you don't mind, please. So I hear no questions, no comments. I want to go ahead and go for a vote. Those in favor of LC 490791S HB 999, please say aye. Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
Test 1, 2, check, check.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I can give a few highlights and brief instructions. We'll call the meeting to order in a moment, but before we do, our assistants are passing out copies of the bill that is not in your folder.
Just a reminder for those who may have come in late, we just finished subcommittee. So we will convene the House Full Education Committee here momentarily. Sorry, there is a sign-up sheet being placed in the back. Ladies and gentlemen, I will call this meeting of the House Full Education Committee to order so that we can begin moving forward. But to start us out, I'll ask Representative Irwin to open us in prayer.
Bow your heads, please. Dear Heavenly Lord, thank you for the opportunity to pray to you today, Lord. Thank you for the wisdom that you give us to make decisions for this great state, Lord. Allow us to move forward with this group for these children in this state, Lord. Watch over us, keep us healthy and safe. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Representative Irwin. Members of the committee, before you in your folder, you have House Bill 885 LC 490692. Chairman Belton could not be here with us today due to some family health issues, but Representative Irwin has very graciously agreed to present this bill to the committee on Chairman Belton's behalf. So Representative Irwin, I will turn the microphone over to you on the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Coach Belton asked me to be a pitch hitter, and I'm definitely want to be a pitch hitter for our veteran families and children of the veterans that we have in this state. Many of us know that so often military families are at a disadvantage when they're looking at enrollment opportunities for their children due to the military directed reassignments and just the placement of our soldiers. And so the bill here, and I'm working off of LC 490692, Mr. Chairman, is that correct? Good. And it's related to our QBE Act, so as to revise the definition of the term military students to provide that military students may attend any public school in the local school system in which such students reside, subject to certain conditions regarding transportation, to require local school systems to allow military students to continue enrollment in their current public school for specific periods of time, regardless of the parent's change of residence. And this is subject to certain conditions for transportation. So in other words, they don't have to only live on the base to have this flexibility afforded to our military children. With that, Mr. Chairman, I think this is a pretty simple bill that you'll see and a good thing for our military families and ultimately our military children.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Irwin. And if I could, to members of the committee, just add a brief 2 sentences on behalf of Chairman Belton. House Bill 885 would expand the definition of a military child to include children who do not live on a military base. It also reinforces the idea that if a military member was to move, but the military child wished to continue the school year at a Georgia school, that military child could do so. So at this time, we'll open it up for any questions from members of the committee. We have no members online, so
Mr. Chairman, if I could, let me add also that if this is 11th grade students in the military or our soldier was transferred and moved, that student would be allowed to stay in that system and complete their education. I personally think that's very valuable, especially if you look at the student that had been there maybe since kindergarten all the way 11th grade and then has to attend another high school in another state or at another base. It makes sense to allow that.
Very valid point. Representative Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. About how many students would this affect? Do we know?
We have just a quick conversation with Chairman Belton was that about 50% of our military children live off base. They don't live on the base. So approximately that many. But remember, this is a small number of our children that we educate in the state of Georgia every year. And then you're cutting that number in half because the ones that live on base already have this option. So we're extending that.
Representative Carter.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for this bill. My only question relates to, we have a provision that the students in 11th and 12th, but my concern is, how do we address a student who parent retires or leaves the military? Will they be able to stay in the school if they're retired or no longer in the military?
Representative Carter, I can't tell you that is stated here in this bill, and that I saw that if they
Representative, if I may, Representative Carter, lines 18 is using this code section. The term military student means a dependent school-age child of a military service member who has received, and going on line 20, has received official military orders to transfer. I am no military expert and would certainly not speak to the law nor to Chairman Belton's intent, but I would think with that language being included, it would have to be an active service member. But I would be happy to defer to Legislative Council if they could offer any kind of clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the bill is drafted, there is not clarification regarding the definition of a military officer. It is used a few different ways elsewhere in the code and including in Title 20. Sometimes it is limited to active duty military members. Sometimes it is including certain reserve and National Guard units. So that is, there's an opportunity there to provide clarification in the definition if that were to be on the committee's will.
And if I may, to that point, per Chairman Belton, it says that we would expand the definition of a military child. So that may be his language, but is there any definition that, to your point there, I'm guessing there's not?
There is not one specific to this code section, but it would be easy enough to provide one, or we could even make reference to existing definitions elsewhere in the code that would make it expanded to include what I assume the question is, you want to get to a group of people, so we could refer to a definition of active military, or excuse me, military member that gets to both active duty and reserve. Is that the question?
I'll come back to that. Chairman Setzler.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would just ask what the author and what may perhaps the chair and others policy intent is. I mean, I think we could talk about the language. I think the language solves itself once you figure out what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, I read this, I think as counsel says, is a transfer within the military. You know, the conventional term ETS, end of term of service, is when you get out of the military. Sometimes that comes with a job move. Speaking for only myself as a committee member, I'd like to expand the definition to include an ETS. If you get out, you get to take the benefit of this, even though you're no longer a soldier after that. Because again, a lot of times when folks, if you're in Hawaii, for example, and you finish your term of service, you're going to come back to Georgia, you're in Fort Stewart, you're going to move back home to Idaho, or wherever you go. It's a policy question, I think, but I don't think this covers an ETS that I think the lady alluded to, and perhaps we would want to include that.
Thank you, Chairman Setzler. Are there other questions from the committee? Representative Irwin, anything additional?
No, sir.
Okay. So maybe again, my question for our council is, at this time, when we refer to a military student, is that broad enough in description to apply only to active duty or to guard? I'm just trying to determine if we are too narrow or too broad at this time, and that making changes could go the opposite intended direction.
I think it is most accurate to say it's arguably neither or both, really. I mean, they're just, the definition is not specific. So if anyone who would have received an official military order, either in the context of active service or reserve status, it would apply to them. So
thank you, Chairman Setzler.
Again, I was just asking the gentleman's intention. I mean, is it the intention to include this for National Guard or reserve people? It's a policy question.
Again, I don't want to speak for Chairman Belton, but I believe the gentleman has made it clear through his past legislative endeavors that he wants Georgia to be the most military-friendly state in the country, and I believe that his intent would be to impact the most students in a positive a way as possible. So,
I mean, I read military service members, any member of the service, active or reserve, because it doesn't specify active component at all. So I think it's the broader definition. I think
I agree. I do. With there being no further questions, what's the will of the committee?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to do pass and then offer a subsequent amendment.
Screen's dead. There we go. Okay. We have a motion and a second that House Bill 885 LC 490692 do pass. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say, Mr. Chairman Setzler.
Yeah, I just would defer perhaps to the wisdom of the chair. I was going to offer an amendment that would have clarified the idea, transfer into or within the state, or complete indeterminate service, ETS. I don't know if that's what council wants to use, or separate from the military. Is it, I'm just asking parenthetically, would it be the will of the committee to include someone who's leaving active duty or leaving service, and that creates this move event, as opposed to moving as a service member? Because as it's drawn now, I think it's not a transfer if you're leaving the service. If we want it to include people who are leaving the service, if their kids get to stay there for the rest of the grade because mom is leaving active duty, then we would need to specify that, I think. I would be friendly to that as a member. I'm just asking committee, would that be the will of the committee?
Chairman Setzler, would that parent would then be obligated to attend the school, their child would be obligated to attend the school district in which they would then live, which means if they moved, we would allow them to stay there?
Yeah, let's say you're at Fort Stewart, Georgia, 45 minutes from Savannah. You get out of the military, you ETS, you take a job at Gulfstream Aviation in Savannah. You might move to Pooler to be near your job, but you want your kid to be able to finish Bradwell in Hinesville. You know, if they get out of the Army, their kid wouldn't get to stay at their school unless we passed this and included ETS in addition to transfer. That's all I'm saying.
I'd be open to that amendment if you believe and council agrees that if council believes that we can create language that is more definitive and actually adds clarity to that. But I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so I'll have to defer to you. While council works on that, I'll acknowledge that per the sign-up sheet, I do not see anyone here to speak to this bill. Is there anyone here who wishes to speak to 885? Just wanted to make sure we didn't pull this too soon. Thank you much.
Mr. Chairman, as I understand the request for amendment, I think it would be a fairly straightforward on line 21, inserting after the word state or has separated from active or reserve military service.
Chairman Setzler, you're recognized this time for a motion. If you'll grab your mic, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'd like to put in the form of amendment the language that council will read by simply inserting on the end of line 21 a clause that again addresses people who were leaving service. I don't know that has is the modifier because it needs to be the event. I'm sorry, it's modified by previous 12 months. You're right, council. So could you read that for me, please? Let's start on line 20.
So the new definition would be military student means a dependent school-age child of military service member who, within the previous 12 months, has received official military orders to transfer into or within the state, or has separated from active or reserve military service.
And do you believe the 12 months modifies both of those?
It does. I did not recommend inserting any other punctuation, so the 12 months would cover both.
Thank you. That's my amendment, Mr. Chair.
The Setzler amendment, there is a motion for the Setzler amendment. Is there a second? There is a second. All those in favor of adopting the Setzler amendment? I will entertain the question. If you can, members, if you have a question, please press your button on your, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, what I was concerned about was ensuring, and I guess if you could tell me if a student was in the school under this rule and the parent retired, what I was concerned about, that they would be able to continue in the school if the parent retired, left the military. So if that language that we just added in here, would it cover that? Not if they retire within 12 months. I'm not, if they're retired, they're not, I wasn't trying to add them as a part of this. I'm saying if they're in the military and you have a student that's like in the 11th or 12th grade and this parent retires, he's no longer in the military. I want to ensure that that student was covered, or those students.
If I may,
Please.
Mr. Chairman, yes, under subsection D, I think that would apply regardless of the Setzler amendment language. Essentially, if they get enrolled under this act, then that would be the trigger that would keep them in that protected status until they complete that grade, or if they're an 11th grade students, they complete high school. So their status at the time of enrollment is what would be operative.
Thank you very much. All in favor of the Setzler amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Setzler amendment is adopted. There is now before the committee a question, once again on House Bill 885 LC 490692. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Ladies and gentlemen, in your folder, there should be a copy of House Bill 60. Please follow me on the LC number 490793 by substitute. If you don't have that copy in your folder. Okay. Representative Cantrell, you are up. And Representative Cantrell, as you and I discussed previously, we are in the second year of a 2-year term, and some of us may forget that those bills carry across. And someone in this committee may be sitting wondering why we're seeing this again since it passed out of this committee. So would you give us 30 seconds of history, please, sir?
Sure. This bill passed out of this committee last year and passed out of Rules Committee as well. It was eligible to go on the floor, but we chose not to put it on the floor last year and bringing it back this year. I do have a couple of small changes to it, and I don't want to belabor this, but I also don't want to, if somebody needs to know more detail, I'm not trying to hide any detail as well, but we have heard this bill before. The bill basically provides a promised scholarship for students which meets a certain criteria. Number one, they have to be enrolled in public school, and then they have to be, if you look on lines, beginning of line 69, it tells you the qualifications. If you were in here for the hearing of House Bill 999, the difference is House Bill 60 it only applies to very specific categories of students. Number one, they've got to be enrolled in public school. Number two, they have to be part of a family that's below 400% of the federal poverty level. And they have to be, or they can be from a foster family. Those kids have been moved around a lot. And a lot of times if they get adopted into foster care, that family has a certain tradition of education. We ought to give them that option to be educated the same way the other family members are. Or they're a family member of a military, active duty military family, as you can see on line 83. And then line 86 is for special needs students who qualify for this. And it has a long definition of that. It's the same as what's in the SB 47 that we passed last year. And then the last category would be on line 114, which would be a student that was in a school system that did not offer in-person instruction for a whole semester. So the student was not allowed to have in-person instruction for an entire semester. They would be eligible for the promised scholarship the following year. I also changed the funding mechanism here. Last year's bill, it was the actual designated state amount for that particular student. That becomes confusing when you're trying to explain to families how much money would be in the account. So what I did this year was I made it 95% of the statewide average. So each student will receive, the scholarship would be in the amount of 95% of what the state on average is supplying for that student. This coming year, that's going to be about $6,300, $6,400. So the scholarship's going to be about $6,000 because it'd be 95% of that amount. This bill is capped at 1/4% of enrollment, which is about 4,000, a little over 4,000 students would be eligible the first year. We would add 1/4% each year until it caps out at 2.5% total in 10 years. So 4,000 students the first year, 8,000 the second, 12, you can do the math. Of course, it depends on enrollment because it's based upon a percentage of enrollment. And this bill is only active if QBE is fully funded. So it would require the General Assembly to fully fund QBE funding for our public schools in order for this program to be active. So let's say we started this program next year, fully fund QBE. Then the following year, we decide, I'm not going to be here, so you guys make a huge mistake and you don't fully fund QBE. Then there'll be no new applicants for this program. Only the students that we're currently in would be able to stay in. Does that make sense? You with me? And those are the main differences between this bill and 999. It's a lot more narrow in its focus on students, trying to focus like a laser focus on those students that need to have an option the most.
Representative, you mentioned, let me go back to the example you just gave. So this is prospectively up to 10 years. So let's say that we fully fund QBE in year one, that gets us 1/4%.
1/4%, yeah.
The next year we fully fund, that gets us to 0.5%. Then we take an 8-year hiatus on fully funding QBE. Does that 10 years, is that then?
No, it would freeze. It would freeze for that time until we fully funded QBE again. And then the escalator would pick up again at that point.
So it can only be funded up to 10 total years, but they don't have to be consecutive years.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer. I don't know that it's specifically, the language specifically applies to what you're talking about or not. That's the intent, but I can't tell you for a fact. Our attorney would have to speak to that.
I'll let him look at that for a moment while I ask my only other question. Is there any duplication? I'm not sure that's the right word, but we're going to go with that, of available funds between SB 47 that was passed last year and HB 60 that you're proposing before this committee?
It's a great question. Lines 124 through 127 deal with that issue to specifically say that a special needs students would have to choose between the funding available in SB 47 or the funding available in this bill. They could not do both.
Thank you very much.
And for some special needs families, this bill would make more sense. And for some, they would probably prefer to stay where they are.
Understood. And counsel, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the answer is provided really in two spots, but most directly on line 146 and paragraph number 3, where it provides the annual limit increases will not be authorized for any year in which the General Assembly does not fully fund QBE. And then a little more indirectly, since the program grows by the number of participating students, and since no new participating applicants could join in a year in which QBE was not funded, as a practical matter, the program would not grow.
So therefore, they do not have to be consecutive years.
Correct.
Thank you. Are there questions from the committee for the bill author? Representative Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Got a couple of questions, if I could. This will be the third private school voucher program that would come along. We already have 2 and expanded one of those last year. Why do we need another?
That's a great question. A lot of families that I talk to love the 2 programs that we have, but because there's not any private education options for them where they live, this gives a little more flexibility for tutoring, for online learning, for textbooks, for therapies for those that have special needs, and particularly as it relates to special needs families, Chairman Benton. They tell me that it's very unlikely that there's a private school in their area that meets the needs of their particular student. So they need more of a cafeteria approach to meeting their needs, which would involve tutoring, therapies, those kind of things that can't be met by just sending your kid to the local private school, whatever it is.
Well, let's say that the child moves, but there's not a private school. Does a school system have to take them if they don't have room?
Does a public school have to take them? Well, sure.
Even if they don't have room.
Oh, I think if a child moves into a school district, my understanding is the public school has to take them.
Well, what I'm getting at is if you're going to offer a scholarship and maybe they're going to use that scholarship for transportation and they want to travel to another school system, does that school system have to take them if they don't have room?
Well, it doesn't apply to public schools, so that would be up to the local district to determine their policy.
On these private schools, are they required to report how much they spend public money received? And if they do, are the individual schools subject to audit by the Department of Audits and Accounts like public schools?
They do have to have an annual audit, and they do have to submit a report of however many students they have participating in this program that have enrolled in their
They don't have to
school.
show how it's spent, correct?
And it's tuition. I'm not sure how to answer that question.
The participating students, are they required to take the milestones exam and have school level results publicly stated?
No, they're not required to take the milestones. They are required to take other nationally approved testing mechanisms.
Give me an example.
I can't. I mean, the Iowa test, there's multiple options available to them that, and then they have to report those results annually.
The teachers that are at these private schools, are they required to be certified?
They're not. They're required to have a certain level of experience, but they're not required to be certified.
do parents have any legal recourse if a participating private school does not provide services or accommodations mandated under an IEP or Section 504 plan?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not sure I know what you're asking me. Legal recourse against the private school?
Yeah. In other words, if they go there and all of a sudden the private school doesn't offer them anything for their IEP or their 504 plan, what alternative do they have left?
I guess I'm failing to understand why would they go there if the school doesn't offer what their kids
Maybe it was
need?
there in front of them, but somewhere along the line, the private school decided not to do that anymore.
Well, their legal recourse would be to leave and take their money with them.
So that would mean a special ed student might have to change schools.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chairman Setzler.
And Mr. Chairman, to the gentleman, I wanted to address one question that Chairman Benton raised, was the issue of milestones testing versus a national norm reference test. I mean, the milestones test is a test that tests kids on specific learning that's targeted to what's taught in the scope and sequence that's appropriate to what may be delivered in their public school system. A national norm reference test, isn't it true, benchmarks kids effectively at their grade level on general topics, but it's not as curriculum or standard specific as a milestone test.
Yeah, the gentleman makes a great point, because why would we require them to test to a curriculum that they're not teaching, which is what the milestones would do.
It's asked all the time. I mean, there's a $14 billion public education system in our state. And, it was interesting, the folks that came and spoke earlier, I would hesitate to mention all the organizations and the people who are here, whose presence here speaking against your bill is paid for by our tax dollars.
Correct.
I think it's important to note that and remark that.
Yeah, I would say, I would note that every single person that spoke against the bill in the earlier hearing was paid to do that.
So I think it's an important point to make that the milestones test is a test for standards and specific scope and sequence as opposed to general benchmarking. Your bill still requires testing for general grade level
Correct.
benchmarking, but it's not standard specific.
That's correct.
And furthermore, with respect to certified teachers, isn't it true that our public charter schools don't require all of our teachers to be certified through PSC? Many of them are great professionals in their own right who don't bring that teacher accreditation, but still within the accountability measures of the school are still, in many cases, produce great outcomes. Isn't that true?
That's correct.
Thank you, Chairman Setzler. Representative Wynn, is that you? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to first say that Representative, you and I are paid to be here, are we not?
Yes, we are.
And we are paid to be here to advocate on behalf of those whom we represent, just like the individuals who came forward today.
That is true. My point was that the parents that were here spoke in favor of the bill, and they're not a lobbyist.
Okay. Well, I wanted to just walk through some math with you. And I know that you talked about some of the math before, and I just wanted to get some clarity around it. So I used slightly different numbers from you. I based it on a 1.7 million enrollment, which is slightly higher than what it is by a couple thousand. And then I based it on this year's allocation, which was 5,751. So I took 95% of that, right? And so in year one, if this program is fully maxed out, it would be approximately $23 million, plus we put in the 500 for transportation. So about roughly $25 million. And with your math, it's about 26 million putting those two together. You use 4,000.
I don't understand. You're adding transportation. How are you doing that?
That $500 allocation.
That's it. That's part of the account.
Okay.
That's included.
Okay. So then we take that away. So using our math, it's roughly 24 million in year one. Roughly.
Sounds right.
Okay.
I'll trust your math.
Okay. So that's based on 4,000 students, based on 6,000, 24 million. If this is fully maxed out over 10 years, we are looking at roughly 42,500 students. That's over $230 million.
Okay.
If fully funded. Okay, so I wanted to put the math on the table because it is hard to figure out the cost of this
Right, but I would
Right.
say to you, since we're funding them at 95% under my bill, we're currently funding them at 100%. That's
Okay.
how they become eligible. So in 10 years, if I just trust your math, let's say it's around 400, then we saved $20 million because that's 5% less than what we would have spent had they stayed in our public school system.
Sure. So we're looking at roughly over $230 million. And one of the conversations that you and I have had and you've had in this committee is our commitment to fully funding public schools.
Correct.
Fully funding our QBE formula. And I agree that we have to do that. And we know that this year is likely that will happen with our proposed budget. But missing in that conversation is whether or not the QBE formula is sufficient to address the growing needs. We haven't changed that in a number of years, right? And then also we know there are other things that public schools need. The transportation formula needs to be fully funded. One of the speakers who came in talked about the need for school counselors and changing that ratio specifically because we know that all of us, including school children, have really seen an increase in mental health, right? And then also nurses to student ratios. So is it fair to say, even with fully funding our QBE formula, that public school systems still need other resources?
I'm sure they would say they do. I don't know the impact, but I would say if you pass this bill, we could take the money that the state is saving and use it towards some of the programs that you're talking about. I think that'd be a great marriage.
I have a follow-up question as well, because we also know that our public education system is under great scrutiny right now. We have multiple bills in the General Assembly that are introduced that are that essentially tell educators, what it is they can and can't teach or can and can't say in a classroom, right? And we are using public funding with this program. It will be sent to private schools, and those private schools will not face the same level of scrutiny. So my question is, if we are using public dollars to fund private schools, why don't these schools have the same level of accountability
Yeah.
and scrutiny as our public schools?
You're right. They don't have the same level of accountability. They have a much higher level of accountability because the families have the freedom to leave and take their money with them anytime they're not happy with what's going on at the school. They don't have that option currently in the public school. I would also say to the issues that some of the hot button issues that are out there, CRT, obscenity, how we're handling the pandemic. If we give parents an option, then I think it's going to be a much healthier environment to have debate about those issues because parents will have to be listened to because they will actually have an option to do something about it if they're unhappy. And that cuts in both directions. If they want CRT taught, I'm just picking something, okay? Then they can, and it's not being, then they can say or revisionist history, or we don't like the way my school's handling the pandemic, or I don't like the way they're teaching sex ed. I don't like the fact that my kid's being bullied and I can't get the administration to do anything about it. It gives parents a little more leverage to have a conversation with administrators where they can be taken a little more seriously.
But we are using public money for private schools. And so there's just not.
We're giving money back to the taxpayers and allowing them to use it how they see fit to fund students and not systems. That's the big difference. We already do this with the Pell Grant. We do it with the GI Bill. We do it with pre-K, where the money follows the student. We do it in pre-K. We do it in secondary education, higher ed. All I'm asking is that we consider that same logic for K through 12.
Representative Maynor.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just start by saying that the questions that I'm about to ask you are me being a parent of two children, one being 9 years old, one being 16 years old. So I have children in K through 12 schools. For line 43, would you be amenable to, it says accredited or in the process of becoming accredited? I think that in the process of being accredited should probably be taken out because on 179, And down, it says this, to be eligible, the school must demonstrate fiscal soundness by having been in operation for 1 school year or by submitting a financial information report for the school that complies, so on and so on.
It takes typically 3 years to get accreditation. The reason we did that is because in a lot of our rural counties, particularly where there are not private school options, if this bill were to become law, you would see some things begin to develop because it would create the opportunity in those communities for them to have some more options. So that was why we left it that way, so they could be in the process to encourage startups to address the specific needs of a specific community might have from an educational perspective. That's the thought behind that. It's
So-
not to try to be sneaky about accreditation. And then again, the parents still, control their kid's destiny at that point. If they want to, if they don't want to go to a school that's just in process, they don't have to go.
And so they'll still need to be in school for 1 year, and then they can wait until their accreditation. Is that,
Yes,
okay?
that's an accurate reading.
Then on line 73, one thing that is not being said, and I have said this in a committee meeting before, I am the child that was in line 73 and down. So a public school that has been placed in 2 consecutive school years in the lowest quartile among schools. So this bill is for children that are in failing schools. One of the reasons.
Correct. And I think I skipped that over. I don't think I said that when I listed the categories.
The second reason, families whose income is below 400% of the federal poverty line. That's who this bill is for.
Yes.
Let's see. For lines 120. Could you explain, it says not to enroll the student in a local school system, local charter school, state charter school. What was your rationale for that? Why they could not? do
That's just
that?
a disclaimer. It's in all the choice programs to make sure that a parent doesn't somehow figure out a way to enroll in this program and keep their kid enrolled in public school at the same time. It's probably not necessary, but it's just to make it absolutely crystal clear that you can't do that.
Okay. And, something else that has come up, that people came to me and asked me about lines 124 to 127. And you did say this already, but I just want to highlight it again.
Mhm.
Some people are saying that this bill excludes children with special needs. This is just saying that you can't have one or the other.
You have to have
can't-
one or the other. You can't do both,
Correct.
is what those lines say. Yes. The language is a little bit confusing, but I confirmed it with Ledge Council as recently as I think Friday to make sure that that was worded in a way so that if you're enrolled in the special needs scholarship, you can't enroll in a promise scholarship in addition to that. You have to choose one or the other.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, can I keep going, please?
One more, please.
Are we going to vote on this today?
That will be up to the will of the committee.
Okay. Well, let me do my last question, even though I have several more questions. Line 150, 149, it says, if during an enrollment period, the commission receives more applications than are permitted under this subsection, the commission shall give equal priority admittance. That can be a little subjective. So I feel like it should say something about by chronological order of submission, just so no one can say that somebody's child was given priority over another if it's stamped.
Right. The way that I interpret that is it's a lottery. The names are all just put in a hat and they're
Okay.
chosen at random.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Representative Wade. Two real quick questions. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Wes. Want to make sure on clear one thing on the teacher certification. Are you open to a potential substitute in which a receiving school would have to employ certified teachers at
I
all?
mean, that's the will of the committee. That would be an unfriendly amendment to me, just from personal experience.
Okay.
It's because so many of the most effective educators I know are not certified.
Well, aren't there lots of, I'm not arguing with you. I want to make sure there's a lot of educators that come from industry that go through a process like taking the GACE to get certified.
Right.
So there's not a lot of barriers to prevent people that have a passion to teach to go through the process of becoming a certified teacher in Georgia if they, that's been my experience. And
I
if I'm
hear you.
incorrect.
And I wish we could incentivize that behavior, but I hate to require it. I sat on a board of a hybrid school, and we at first did not require it. And then we did require it, but it took us a while to get to that point for that very reason that we encourage our educators to get involved and to begin to, get in the process of getting certified. It's definitely desired, but I just don't know that it should be required.
All right. And then my next and last question is can you at least tell me where you came about the 400% versus 300% versus 500? I'm just curious to your thinking.
That's about 100,000 for a family of four. Actually was at a lunch a couple of weeks ago with mostly Democrat colleagues. There were a couple of Republicans there too. And they actually expressed the concern that the number, because it was at 200%, which is 50,000 and below, round figures. And they felt like it was too low, that it didn't open it up. That's the only reason.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Wade. She has been waiting so patiently. Representative Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I think my concern about this legislation largely is mirrored by the comments that Representative Nguyen pointed out about where we are with our funding our public schools right now. I've heard from countless people about the need, we need to improve our counselor ratio. We've defunded transportation, especially in our rural areas. We have a great need for school nurses in our schools. These are things that are outside the QBE formula and that the state needs to fund. And so I'm very concerned about this bill taking, defunding our public schools of $230 million.
But it doesn't do that. Go ahead and finish. I'm sorry.
Well, these are funds that our schools need. They have, our public schools have fixed, some fixed costs that they have to cover. And if we keep chipping away every year with these voucher bills, we're putting them in a more and more untenable situation. And the state constitution requires that we give a quality public education to our students. Doesn't say public or private. So I appreciate your intent on this, but I'm very, very concerned about this impact of this legislation on our public school system and I
understand. Yeah, I would respectfully disagree. I've looked at the funding formula and the state economist did a study on it. And for every student that would take a program like this, it would actually save the school that they left an average of $3,800. So you're not defunding public school. You're actually adding more and the funding per student goes up. So I don't disagree about the counselors. I'm all in on that. And you couldn't have found a stronger advocate a couple of years ago to make sure all those folks were included in the first installment of the raise that the governor was giving. But I think it's not either or. We have the ability to do both. I don't think we should say, well, we're not going to give parents a choice because we need more counselors in the school. And if we give the choice by this, the numbers don't lie. It saves the public schools money, saves the state money, 5% for every student. So we could take that money and roll it into to pay for some of these things that you're concerned about.
And let me interject. And I know there's a number of you who have already asked questions, who would like to ask questions again. And out of respect to those members of the audience who are here to speak, I'd like to give them time to do so. And this is the time to ask questions of the author as it relates to the bill. We'll debate should there be a motion open. I'll allow very brief comment, please.
Thank you, Chair. May I ask one more question? Okay, thank you. And do you have any data about outcomes for students in these private schools?
Yeah, there was some cherry picking earlier in the 999 testimony because there's a lot of studies about this. And there have been some studies that have showed negative outcomes, but I think, don't hold me to this, but I believe it's 25 out of 27 studies. I may have that number a little bit off, so, because I don't have it in front of me, showed positive outcomes, not just for the students who left the public school, but for the ones that stayed behind. As a former public educator for 8 years, every time I taught a class, almost without exception, there were some students in there who really had no business being in the classroom, but because I was required to have everybody in there, they were. And so I was expending a disproportionate amount of my resources on the students who weren't really ready to learn, where the rest of them, the 90% that were ready, did not get what they needed, as much what they needed from me because of that. So what happens in the studies show that those are the students that are most likely to take advantage of a promised scholarship, is one that's not performing well in the public school. So they leave, they do better because they're getting more individual attention. It's more catered to their needs. And then you have students remain in the public school who are in the right learning environment, and they don't have the disproportionate draw on resources that these other students were creating. So 25, I think it's 25 out of 27 showed a positive academic outcome increase for both students who left and students who stayed. So I see it as a win-win.
I'll leave time for us hopefully to have discussion on this momentarily, but I'd like to move to our public comment portion. So Wes, if you.
Thank you. So I'll wrap my 3 questions. First, if HB 60 passed, is there a need for HB 999? As I asked you in 999, if this bill HB 60 passed, I would prefer to see a minimum of 2 years that the school was open, so you can at least have 1 year of audited financials. And on the qualifications for this particular bill in HB 60, you have a list of, I think it starts from 91 to 113, and it's saying or. So a student can have either of these diagnosis and be qualified for this particular scholarship.
That's correct. That's the same list as what's in SB 47 that we passed last year. These bills are mutually exclusive. So I would only pass one of these bills, HB 60 or HB 999. And there may be a reason to combine some of the best elements of both. I don't know. But I would just go back, I hear you. Nobody's ever presented a perfect bill. And I hear you, 1 year, take 1 year to 2 year. But at the end of the day, the bottom line for me is that I trust the parents that if they're going to do their due diligence, if they're going to send their kid to a private school, do their homework, get to know the administration, everything there, regardless of whether the school's been open a year or 5 years, the process is going to be the same. And, if a parent deems that that's the best spot for their child, then I trust them to make that decision. And then if they, they have to take it from there.
Did that get the third question answered? Okay. Wes, if you'll join me here, and for those of you who were here before, we'll open public comment, ask you to keep those. As I was reminded by my colleague, this bill was in subcommittee and full committee last year, which would have satisfied our obligation for opening up the opportunity for public comment. And in sticking with tradition and being fair-minded, where we have not opened full committee up to public comment for bills this year, I'll remain with that. I know that there are a number of lights lit up, and I believe that those, again, if I'm reading everyone correctly, that they have already asked questions. So here's the posture that we're in. Sure. I'll give you that opportunity. And I'm going to satisfy these lights that are open. If these are questions to ask of the author pertaining to specifics of the bill, if it is debate, then I would ask that be postponed to ask until there is the perspective of debate on that bill. So Representative Nguyen, I will happily open that up if these are clarifying questions.
Yes, so I wanted to clarify, so a student under who would qualify for this, you just have to meet one of those conditions. So there's the schools that are low performing, and then you said the 400% of federal poverty line is 100,000 for a family of 4.
That's
Yes,
correct.
That's correct. Okay. And then, but I think the one that really lines 114 to 116, that you would just have to meet that one condition, right? So if it's a school, a public school that did not offer 100% of learning instruction in person for at least one semester, and given we are kind of in this hybrid model right now, that would expand drastically who could qualify under this.
Are you aware of schools that have been closed to in-person instruction for an entire semester?
Under the COVID pandemic, certainly, yes.
Okay. Here, I think my position on that is that I think the districts have the right to make that decision. That's within their purview. But shouldn't a parent have the right to find another option for their child, especially special needs families, that virtual learning is a joke? So all I'm saying is, yes, local control, make your decision, and it may be warranted, but shouldn't a parent have the option in that case to find another place so their kid can learn and not fall behind?
Right. I mean, I just wanted to clarify, you just need to meet one of these, so it would.
That's correct,
expand,
just
right?
one of them.
Okay. And then I have a second follow-up question, and this is something I don't know because I don't have any children enrolled in private schools. So when a parent goes to a private school to enroll their child, how does that typically work? Do they have to pay for one full semester up front, and do they have to sign a contract? And if they pull a student out because things are not working, does the money follow?
That's a great question, and every school is different. So the parent does their due diligence and decides what kind of payment plan they're comfortable with and makes that decision accordingly. Because every school, my understanding is every private school, they can set up their payment plans however they want. And they may have a discounted plan if you pay up front or you pay monthly, or, I can't really give you a definite answer for that.
Chairman Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the author, and I'd ask a couple narrow questions before, but I wanted to ask something that I was really struck, and I want people who are listening today to hear this, and I want to confirm this the way you've drafted this bill. Under this bill, state money is following the kids. And for those who are listening today who may not know this, broadly speaking, you've got state money that funds kids, and there's got local money that funds kids. Some districts it's more or less, but generally speaking, it's about half state money, half local money, depending on the district. So in this case, the state money follows the kid, but if the kid leaves the school system and takes this private option, all the local tax money that's been funding them their whole time in public schools stays behind in the public school.
That's right.
It's used by the public school, but there's no kid that have to educate. So let's say it's $4,000 follows the kid and $4,000 stays behind in the public schools that was locally raised tax dollars. There's no kid in that seat, but there's still $4,000 there to educate the other kids in that classroom that get to benefit that. So per pupil funding goes up as a result of this, doesn't it?
And Chairman Sussler, that's true regardless of the reason why the student left the system. If they moved to a different state or a different district, that same thing would be true. It's no different.
So when folks come, if there were folks who are lining up on the wall speaking against this about, oh, we're diverting funds, this is hurting our schools financially, this actually, by virtue of this, because it's only state funds and there's billions of dollars across the state and or tens and hundreds of millions in our local communities of local tax dollars that stay in the public schools, per pupil funding goes up for the kids that are there. So the idea, this is a financial cuts them off at the knees. Actually, it's quite the opposite. And I think folks hearing this today needs to understand that intimately. Actually, it's quite the opposite of what's being proposed by some folk.
And that's what the study of Dr. Dorfman from a few years ago, he looked at, and he took into account fixed cost as well, because there are fixed costs that schools have to pay whether the kids in the classroom or not. He took that into consideration And still, at the end of the day, the schools benefited on average to the tune of $3,800 across the state per student for a student that would take a program like
One
this.
more, please. One more question, Mr. Chairman. Okay. To Chairman Cantrell, the state of Georgia doesn't own hospitals and employ many doctors. It's generally a private nonprofit healthcare system, or in case some cases, a for-profit healthcare provider that provides healthcare, even that's publicly funded across our state. Isn't that true?
Yes.
So what we're talking about here is a circumstance that we experience every day in our lives, whether it's a GI Bill that goes to Emory University to fund someone in law school, whether it's a Hope Scholarship that goes to Berry College, or whether it's, in this case, or in other cases, it's healthcare funds that are funded through Medicaid and Medicare. That private delivery of core vital services to which people have a right, which is, or certainly an interest, which is healthcare, is provided by private providers every day at scale. Almost everybody in our states gets it provided privately. How is this different except in an education context?
It's not different. It's the same. We do with pre-K as well. The funds follow the student.
Representative LaRicchia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few moments ago, you mentioned the traditions of this committee. And in keeping with one of the greatest traditions of this country, that being freedom at the proper time, I'd like to make a motion do pass.
You're recognized for that motion at this time.
Move do pass on House Bill 60.
There is a motion do pass. Is there a second? There is a motion and a second that House Bill 60 LC 490793 by substitute do pass. Is there any discussion? Representative Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. Did I hear you earlier, Chairman Cantrell, that there would be a choice between this bill or 999? Did I hear that right?
The question was asked, did we need both bills? I think, is that right? And I said, no, they would be mutually exclusive. You wouldn't pass both of those. So if, we will have to, if 999 were to make it out of committee, we would make a choice as to which one would go to the floor for the vote.
Thank you.
Representative Maynor.
Can I offer an amendment, a motion for an amendment, or just clarification of something?
I'd be happy if you'd like to ask counsel for clarification on something in the bill.
Yes.
Please proceed.
For line 175, 176, any parent who fails to comply with the provisions of this chapter and commission regulations relating to the program shall forfeit the account and all account funds therein. Is there any way where those funds can go back to the homeschool? Because if they're forfeited, where are they forfeited to?
The language in the statute does not specifically provide, I guess I would have a question on the kind of the hypothetical that's being presented. If those funds have already been provided to the participating private school, I don't know that there is an express mechanism in the bill to attempt to claw that back. There are auditing functions and other mechanisms in the bill to make sure that funds are appropriately spent. But if, I guess really I would have a question as to what would be the status of those funds. Where are you trying to get them back from? If they are with the parents, then getting them back to the state, I think they would go back to the general fund and find their proper home. They can't lapse anywhere, so they would get back into the general fund to be redistributed. If they're with the participating school, that would probably be a function of an audit finding.
Representative Carter.
Okay, her question threw me off a little bit because I was thinking that these funds were not coming out of the QB funding. So how would it go back to the school? That's not really what my question is, but that one kind of threw me off, and I guess you can fix it. But I do need to understand if we're having a hearing on this bill that passed out of committee last year. I don't remember if you stated that there were some changes in this bill, which is why we're having a new hearing. And if we're having a new hearing, why wouldn't we hear testimonies from individuals outside of?
Representative Cantrell did outline those changes that were in the bill today. And since this bill was recommitted, this is not a new bill. This bill was heard in subcommittee and full committee and was simply recommitted due to, if you will, the process of the House rules and the second year of our biennium. Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is sort of similar to what Representative Maynard brought up, except for I'm wondering if there's a way to put safeguards. So the student enrolls in a private school. I think it's typical that you may have to pay for a year up front, right? And so if the student completes one semester, doesn't work out, and we pull and the student decides to leave and go back to public school, we're losing that funding that paid for the entire year. That, I mean, those are public dollars that would stay within a private school. It would not go back to the public. And so I'm wondering if we can put some parameters around that specific mechanism, given that, as Representative Cantrell said, all these schools are different in terms of what they ask you to commit to, what contracts you sign. And it is likely in some scenarios that that public funding would just be lost to a private school.
Mr. Chair, I'd certainly be open if there's appropriate language to add on, I mean, that's what 173 and 174 say, but I do understand that there could be a case where someone was ahead on the money, you know, and that money. So I certainly be open to adding language there to say that any money, tuition money would have to be refunded to the state at that point. I don't have a problem with that. I'm not sure it's necessary, but I certainly don't have a problem with it.
And I believe that council's diligently and frantically working on that. So we'll give pause to him. Council.
Okay, if we are still focused on that subsection J at lines 175 and 176, I believe there can be an amendment by inserting after the word therein on line 176, and such forfeited funds shall be returned to the state.
Representative Nguyen, does that satisfy your request?
Not necessarily, right? Because the way that I read line 175 and 176 is if a parent has funds in the account, right, and the parent fails to comply with the provisions, then the funding in the account will go back to the public. What I'm addressing is if a parent has to pay a year of tuition upfront under a private school contract, so the money is no longer in the account. It's already in the private school system. And the parent decides to pull the student out after one semester because it's not working. That extra funding that they paid ahead of time would not be going back to the public.
Are you referring to the parents' out-of-pocket contribution to that private school?
Well, it depends on how, I guess it depends on how the money is allocated and what they're having to pay, right, to the private school. What I'm getting at essentially is when the money leaves the parent's account and it goes to a private school, if there's a point in which the child is pulled out of the private school, we would want, I would assume would want to see that portion of the money go back to the public funds.
To the what fund? I'm sorry.
Back to our public funds.
Right.
Rather than stay within the school system.
And my understanding in council, I'll let you address, but the money from the parent as it relates to their contract with the school would be dictated by the contract that parent has with the school. But then to council's comment on funds being returned to the state, I would agree, and I believe Representative Cantrell's in agreement that we would want those funds coming back to the state. So council, I'll defer to you again if that satisfies where Representative Wynn and I are heading.
I may have to ask for some more time, Chair. The language that I proposed would be specific to apparent failure to comply. So if now we're dealing with something that would be malfeasance or some problem with the participating school, then I think there'd be an additional amendment language that would deal or provide assurances for what would happen. But perhaps I'm misunderstanding the issue on the table.
The way I understand it, Representative Wynn, you correct me if I'm wrong, is that she's talking about like if you pay your tuition up front for a year, let's just say you pay for a year, and then you get to December and you decide I'm not coming back for the second semester, but the school already has that money in their possession. She wants to make sure that money from the school is returned. Is that Mary right?
Lack of certainty is what's the source of that money? Is that the parents' personal contribution or it's the state?
No, it came out of the promise account that they were given.
Well, the bill provides that that money can only be used for authorized funds, so it would have to be returned. And I think that is.
I think it's
provided
implied.
for,
It's not.
yeah.
It's not spelled out, but I think it's
But I'm happy
implied.
to look for a provision to strengthen that if that's what the request is.
Is that language that we were just discussing there satisfy that the original language that you proposed there? Does that accomplish what she was just referencing?
Well, to the extent that the decision to pull the child out of the school would constitute a failure to comply with the rules, then yes, it would. If it's not a failure to comply with the rules, it would not. This language is specific for a parent who fails to comply with the provisions of the chapter and the commission regulations.
Hold on, microphone, please.
Mr. Chair, there will be some circumstances where it's not a parent's failure to comply, but maybe even with using this program and going to the private school, the needs of the student may not be met within that particular private school. So it's really thinking through, okay, a parent receives this voucher program, enrolls their kid in a private school. It may not work out. We know that, right? So the money that is paid in advance to the private school under this bill as written now would stay in the private school. It would not go back to our public funds, back to our general fund. So I think there should be the line that we're discussing is only in the instance when a parent fails to comply, not in the instance where they may not be getting what they need in that new school.
But that would represent a failure to comply, because then you're not in the program. So I think it covers that. Regardless of why they don't comply, it covers both sides of that. But I hear what you're saying about the money that's already there needing to be refunded.
Right.
But I don't think that issue has anything. I think that's covered under their failure to comply. If they pull their kid out, they're not complying.
Would you read 175 through 176 though, as if the parent fails to comply, they pull their kid out, they're no longer in the program, right? The money in the account, if there's money currently in the parent account, it would go back. But if the money has already been paid to the private school, it's forfeited.
Yeah, we're on the same page that I would not oppose language that would make sure that any tuition money that had already been paid to that private school, if there was extra, that it be refunded to the state. I think that's fair.
And there are provisions that the private school cannot refund or rebate any of those funds to the parent. So the money
Correct.
would have to stay with the school. It's really just then a matter of assuring that it gets, any unused funds would get from the school back to the state.
So it sounds like we're on the same page. Further discussion from Chairman Setzler.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to ask the author's desire with respect to any of this language. You think we're covered, or you think we need to address something?
I think we're talking about something that's so minimal, but I don't mind it being there because I think it's right. I don't think they should be allowed to keep it in this is kind of a really hypothetical situation.
I would agree. I mean, I don't know the chair's posture, if he wanted to take the time to get something crafted, I'm glad to offer that. I think it's, from a policy standpoint though, the language again falls in place once you know what you want to do. is your thinking on a semester basis? Is it a pro rata basis? Is it a per month? Like the parent withdraws their kid in November, so December through May is refunded? Is it just a pro rata per day? What is
Council?
I think we probably have coverage, Chair, if you will, in starting at lines 319. This would be the new code section 22B-7. The commission is given relatively broad authority to adopt rules and regulations necessary for the administration of the program. And then there are some particulars about what those rules and regulations ought to include, particularly given kind of the variety of issues that we've already explored here today. It would make sense that the commission would adopt rules depending on fact-specific circumstances.
Thank you. Chairman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If everyone could look at 261, line 261, this might help regarding the payment structure. It speaks to quarterly payments as opposed to annual or semi-annual. I just wanted to make sure the committee was aware of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And final comment, Representative Evans. She waves. Council, thank you for your guidance and counsel there. Chairman Setchler, for real this time.
I'm not opening up new issues. I'm just saying on lines 264 through 66 is nearly practical. Such quarterly payment shall be equal, provided, however, this shall not prevent payments from being adjusted due to budgetary midterm adjustments made pursuant to, or we could add in, or the withdrawal of a student during a school year. And that just that adding of that clause would allow that adjustment process to be made that would contemplate kind of a mid-cycle adjustment.
And I understand, and I think that I would, my preference should count, unless council should disagree, is that we remain with lines 319 and 320, that the commission shall adopt those rules and regulations, just so that if we were to go to a quarter system or a year-round school system, that I follow where you're going. I just fear if we get too particular in there, we may be back again just to change that. So I thank everyone for their comment and input. We have exhausted our discussion here. Still no members online. Okay. So we have a motion and a second that HB 60 LC 490793 by substitute do pass. All those in favor, we're going to do this by show of hands to make this easy on me. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I have 9. All opposed, same sign. You can't vote twice, Jocus. Motion carries. This committee will stand at ease for 15 seconds. This committee will stand adjourned.